I remember graduating after high school being very, very blue-pilled and naive about the world. And until I discovered guys like, Fresh and Fit, John Zerka, Rollo Tomasi, etc., it was literally like the movie The Matrix and learning that all of my worldviews were a lie, especially about women. And although I was depressed and angry at the time, my life actually changed for the better knowing these things. And it became a lot easier to navigate in the world. And basically, what I'm going to be doing today is talking about 33 red pill and black pill takes that you should know. All right, so number one, hypergamy. Hypergamy is the claim that women are instinctively wired to seek out the highest status partner available to them and to basically trade up if someone better comes along later. A guy named David Buss ran a study across 37 different cultures, roughly 10,000 people total, and found women consistently rated financial prospects and ambition higher than men did everywhere he looked. Now, the blue pill people will like to mention that gap shrinks somewhat in gender equal countries, but what they don't mention is it never flips, not in a single country studied. And also, if you think about it from a more evolutionary psychology standpoint, it's literally instinctual for a woman to want a man with more money, power, resources, right, in order to protect her children and herself. And so you shouldn't hate women for it because, it's their nature. The same way you want a baddie with a fatty. And so for that reason, it also gives you a purpose in life because God is so fair. Once you get money, status, looks, you don't just get one woman to choose from. You get all of them. And this leads me to my next point, the 80-20 rule. This is the claim that a small group of men, roughly about 20% by attractiveness or status, get the overwhelming majority of females, while the remaining 80% compete for what's left over. And the data shows this. Attention on dating apps is really only concentrated hard at the top, and it's not evenly spread. And I know we've all seen this at school or somewhere, but the girls crowd around the chads, right, that play the sports and that look good, while the sub 5 chuds don't even get a glance, or when they are looked at, it's with disgust, which is another reason why you gotta lock in and change your life for the better. All right, number 3, alpha fucks, beta bucks. This is the claim that women pursue two different types of men for two different purposes. An exciting, more dominant alpha type for short-term sex and excitement, and a stable, reliable beta for providing and long-term commitment and raising a family. We all know that one girl that was ran through by the football team, and then later in life, she settles down with some nerdy type dude. And this is based on sexual strategies theory. It's a published framework from evolutionary psychologists, and it describes how different traits get valued depending on whether they're looking for something short-term or long-term. And so, if you want to cast the widest net for attracting women, this is another reason why you have to looks max, status max, and just evolve in every way, because that way, if she's looking for short-term, you got looks max covered. And if she wants more of a stable relationship, you got status and money covered. Number 4, we got sexual market value, or SMV. And dating is a marketplace, right? So where every person carries a kind of value based on traits like looks, age, income, status, and that value changes for men and women as they get older. Women's value peaks in their early to mid 20s and then declines from there, while men's rises through their 30s and 40s. Christian Rudder's OkCupid data also showed that men across nearly every age bracket consistently rated women in their early 20s as the most attractive. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail on why that is, but on the flip side, a man's value climbs for decades because it's tied directly to what men build, like money, status, game, stability, etc. We age like wine, they age like milk. All right, number 5, body count. Slang for someone's number of past sexual partners. A higher number correlates with worse relationship and marital outcomes, and specifically higher divorce risk. Jay Teachman's research found that correlation, and it's also pretty intuitive if you think about it, because attachment or pair bonding isn't the same after. Think about one romantic partner versus 100. That first one you have, there's nothing to compare it to, which women do a lot, by the way, if we're just keeping it all the way real. And they're gonna try and shit test you by saying things like, oh, my ex used to do X, Y, and Z. Don't fall for the rage bait, okay? That's what she wants. Just be dismissive of her and what she said. You gotta be like a rock, and she is the waves of the ocean, okay? Always remember that. Also, another thing, the more bodies she has, the more subconscious resentment she will build up towards men because she feels like she's getting used, right? Over and over again. And this only gets worse with age when they want to settle down. So be very careful, especially of women that are older with higher body counts. Briffault's law. This is named after Robert Briffault, an early 20th century anthropologist. And the law states that the female determines whether a relationship continues and on what terms. And that whatever a man has already invested creates no obligation for her to keep giving in return. In other words, all that time, money, resources you spend on a girl in the long run doesn't really matter to her because she might just say, I'm done with you and leave. And there's tons of real life examples of this, and even just think about the marriage rate statistics. But the main takeaway is don't tie your worth to being a great boyfriend or husband because that could easily change. Instead, you should be tying your own self-worth to yourself, your mind, body, and soul, and mastering the external world, right? Getting what you want and loving your life. This is where your focus should be. Stated versus real preferences. This is the gap between what people say they want in a partner on a dating profile, in a survey, or out loud to a friend, and who they actually end up being attracted to and chasing in real life. Because frequently, the two don't match. Eastwick and Finkel ran speed dating research and found that people's stated ideal partner checklist barely predicted who they actually connected with in the room. And that's great news if you think about it, because what that means is you don't need to match some sort of spec sheet on paper. You just need to generate real chemistry in real time with her. And that's a skill you can build. It's called game, right? Everyone has to learn this. All right, moving on, frame. It's a term borrowed from pickup artist culture, and what it means is to maintain unshakable inner composure and confidence, leading an interaction rather than reacting to the other person's mood or seeking approval. Basically, in other words, staying stoic. If your girl starts crashing out and screaming at you, and you react by doing the exact same, you've lost. You're acting chaotic and feminine, which means that she will long term end up subconsciously resenting you because you are out of your masculine energy and entering into her energy, which signals to her you can't remain calm under pressure, meaning you can't be trusted in a crisis and can't protect her or her kids when it matters. Number 9, all women are the same. Of course, this isn't meant to be literally true, but just like men, women also have some universal traits, thoughts, and opinions, and all follow the same sort of patterns. There's a lot of examples, but just going back to evolutionary psychology, because women aren't built for fighting, the way they would have to survive is just by agreeing with the group. And so that leads to traits like openness and agreeableness, which women consistently score higher on than men in studies. And we all know this is like a universal thing. Just for one example that women do is that they fake that nice voice thing, and they fake compliments to another girl that they actually hate, versus a guy would tell another dude he looks like shit, and he takes the risk of provoking and fighting that other guy. All right, female nature is amoral, not evil. And this goes back to what I sort of talked about earlier. You shouldn't be angry at women for what they want. Wanting the best man they can get is not wrong, right? So imagine your daughter. Would you want her to get the best possible man she can get? Of course. And in the same way, you want the baddest girl you can get that has morals. And so it's not some evil, calculated thing that women do, right? It's not an evil thing for them to have these instincts. And the same goes for you. Marriage is a bad legal contract for men. All right, so this one is self-explanatory. If you don't believe me, just look at the divorce rates. At least 50% of marriages end in divorce, and 80% of them are initiated by women. I would personally argue it's probably higher, and if not, then I guarantee for Gen Z, you're gonna see even higher divorce rates in the future. I'm not gonna go into the reasons why, because that would take forever, but not to mention, child custody outcomes skew heavily towards mothers in most cases. Now, does this mean you shouldn't get married? That's your call. If you're especially religious, maybe you can do it for your church or your mosque and just do a religious marriage instead of, through the state. But personally, at this time in my life, I don't think I will ever get married. Kids, yes, but marriage just seems like a terrible gamble to me. But let me know your thoughts. I'm curious about what you have to say. Happy wife, happy life. All right, so what this is supposed to mean, it's supposed wisdom telling husbands to prioritize their wife's happiness above their own to keep peace at the home. Now, this is just such a psyop because this trains men to treat self-erasure as love. It teaches you giving up your own preferences and needs and opinions is some sort of noble sacrifice. But the thing is, you can't lead a relationship and disappear into it at the exact same time. Relationship research also shows this very well. Equity theory and relationship psychology has found that partnerships where one person consistently overgives relative to what they get back tends to build resentment over time on both sides. And the research done by Gottman shows that contempt as the single strongest predicator of divorce. And contempt often grows in the partner who's had to watch someone stop asserting themselves for years, which ties into my next point. Nice guys finish last. Basically, being a simp. All right, this hurts a man's chances rather than helping because it comes off as low status or low confidence rather than a virtue. And there's a lot of research behind this as well. Attractiveness outweighing nice personality traits in evaluating hypothetical partners specifically. And to give the analytical psychology Jungian take, it also comes off as extremely inauthentic. Because if you want to tell that girl shut up, but you're wearing a mask and you're just a nice guy that wouldn't do anything mean to the girl you love, she can sense it. And that is a huge turnoff because you're signaling to her that you're not trustworthy. And so really it comes down to being your more authentic self, right? And that includes both the nice parts of yourself and also the mean parts of yourself. If she says something stupid, you should laugh about it and call her stupid the same way you would do with the boys. And she will end up respecting you more for it because it shows you're not desperate to win her over and her approval. All right, abundance mentality. What this means, a pickup artist tactic, basically, it's projecting the idea that you have other women or options and you're not overly invested in any one person. And this keeps the current girl you're talking to more engaged. Another thing that's sort of tied to this is what's called dread game. And this means you try and cultivate the fear of losing you. Now, the underlying psychology is very simple. It's the scarcity principle, where things that seem harder to get seem more valuable. And this is well documented, even outside of dating, like in customer or consumer behavior research. And when it's applied here, it holds up pretty well because being overly available comes across as low value. Because if you have no other options, she's going to think something must be wrong with you. Because other women wanting you is a sign of social proof and that you're trusted and safe to be around. And you won't end up being a serial killer. And from a psychology perspective, yes, that is actually in the back of their minds. Why do you think women are so obsessed with serial killers? Having social proof is such a huge thing. Now, putting aside the manipulation framing for a second, a better, healthier version of this is just self-respect, okay? Don't organize your whole week around one girl's text back. Also, I have to say this here so I don't get banned. I do not endorse manipulation, okay? All right, self-improvement is the answer. Now, I know a lot of black pill people are going to be seething at this, but just hear me out. A lot of the points about women I've made has probably made you sad or angry to some extent, but there is no need to be because this entire system exists and forces you into a higher level. And that really is a blessing because looksmaxxing, building skills, getting money, getting better social skills, dressing better, and learning game, this is the bread and butter of life called self-improvement. And this gives you a journey to fulfill and gives your life meaning if you have none. Because all of these things increase your SMV. Specifically fitness, income, grooming, and social skill all show a big link to romantic outcomes in research. And Stoicism and the Red Pill agree on this. Control what's actually yours to control. Every other point in this section really is just about explaining the game, but this is the thing you actually have power over. All right, dating apps and social media inflated expectations. The sheer volume of options presented on dating apps and platforms like Instagram has raised women's standards and expectations beyond what's realistic for the average man to meet. The attention data from the point that I mentioned in number 2 supports the idea that apps genuinely shifted the market. And so knowing that the board has changed means that you can play it smarter, better photos, a profile that actually says something about you, and showing a lifestyle where she can imagine herself in it are a few ways to get noticed. Monkey branching. This is slang for a woman lining up her next relationship before ending her current one, kind of like a monkey swinging from branch to branch. There's no real great studies I could find that could really represent this well, but an enormous number of men report living through this exact pattern, so lived experience from that many people isn't nothing, even without a formal study. And if you guys have any studies, let me know. The male loneliness epidemic. This refers to a very well documented recent trend of rising social isolation, especially among young men in Gen Z, like no friends and no sex specifically. This is the most rock solid data point on this entire list. Rising sexlessness and shrinking friend groups show up consistently across multiple independent surveys, not just one source. And this is an actual crisis we're having, and it's worth putting real energy into it, because having focus on rebuilding relationships, friendships, community, and purpose, that's going to have a huge, massive impact on your life. And that's actually part of the reason why I started this channel in the first place. All right, now moving on to the black pill takes. Some of these I kind of disagree with and sort of agree with, but let's get into it. But first, what is the black pill? The black pill isn't just a harsher version of the red pill. The red pill basically just means self-improvement in all aspects of life, is the best way I would describe it. But the black pill is a different worldview entirely. The red pill says that the game is winnable if you play it right. The black pill says looks and genetics decide almost everything before you even get a turn, and no amount of effort changes that outcome. It's a much more darker, fatalistic, and nihilistic kind of offshoot. I'll begin by saying this. If any of this hits close to home for you, I'm not going to try and talk you out of what you think or feel, but I am going to give my own take on it with a lot of nuance. All right, number 18. All right, so looks determinism. It's kind of the core belief of the black pill. It's the belief that physical attractiveness is the single most powerful, almost the only factor that determines someone's romantic or even broader life outcomes. And so what do I agree with? Yes, looks do matter, and the halo effect research backs that up. People really do get judged as more competent and trustworthy just for being better looking. But what I disagree with, though, is the same research that established this effect describes it as a small to moderate and not total outcome. And it also finds that the longer people actually know each other, the more that impression fades and shifts. And I've also seen this plenty of times in real life, okay? When an ugly looking dude will be hitting on a girl and, she's not really feeling him at first, but as time goes on, she starts warming up to him because, that guy has game, status, money, or whatever, and she slowly learns about this. And so how I would sort of reframe it is this. The door might be narrower for you than it is for someone else, but narrower isn't the same as welded shut. All right, number 19, bone structure primacy. This is the claim that very specific facial skeletal features like your jaw angle, eye shape, cheekbone projection are the real underlying drivers of attractiveness, more than anything changeable through effort. Now, what I agree with is the frustration underneath all of this is real for sure. Feeling like your face was decided for you before you had any say in the matter is very painful. However, technically, these things are changeable to some degree through surgery, bone smashing, and stuff you can do in puberty to change this. I'm not advising this. Don't ban me, YouTube, okay? I'm just throwing it out there. But this is also another reason to get your money up, because if you don't like your current bone structure, surgery is always an option if you believe it to be that big of an issue. Now, of course, do your own research on that, talk to a doctor or professional before doing anything I just mentioned. All right, height determinism. This is pretty simple. The claim is that being below a certain height, mainly being under 6 feet, is a severe crippling disadvantage. Now, this is true to some extent, getting filtered out hard on dating apps is well documented and researched, and that specifically under 6 feet is the sort of filter that a lot of girls use. And it sucks. But now here's the thing. Yes, height is important, but as mentioned before, with looks, money, and status, you can compensate for this because the data shows real world couples show far more height variance, right? In comparison to what's actually preferred on dating apps. Now, for dating apps, are you cooked? Yeah, kinda. Not gonna lie to you. You better get some like 5-inch height boosters or something. But here's the thing, in the real world, compromises happen a lot because the moment actual chemistry enters the picture where you can use game and signal your high value and you have a lot of money and status, and she can see your looks in real life, which of course apps will mostly filter out because you never even get there, right? Things change now because you actually have your foot in the door as opposed to never being let in. All right, number 21, the class system or the tiering system. Chads, Stacy's, Becky's, sub fives, etc. This is just a system that sorts people into attractiveness tiers, like Chad for the most attractive man, Stacy for the most attractive woman. You get the idea. For this, I don't really disagree with this. There is 1,000% tiers for attractiveness, okay, no lie. And studies show that there are objective physical traits that are universally attractive, so it'd be a lie to say there isn't. I know blue pill people will always like try and say, oh, looks are subjective, but that's just like cope. And the only thing I would add to this is that SMV is an overall better metric because this accounts for status and money as opposed to the looksmaxxing tier, because that only accounts for looks. And because SMV accounts for things women also look for in a guy, not just height, I think it's a better metric to use. All right, number 22, mogging. This is when someone is visibly outclassed or overshadowed in attractiveness by another man standing nearby or in the same social setting. Yeah, we've all seen Clav get frame mogged. I'm sure most of you know what this is, but again, there's other ways to compensate. Let's take The Rock and Kevin Hart, for example. Does The Rock height mog Kevin Hart? Yes, of course. But nobody would say that Kevin Hart struggles to get women because he's worked on his looks, status, and he's maxed all of that out. So even if you're a short king, you have ways to elevate yourself. You're not just doomed for life. Now, do you have to put in work? Of course. Is it going to be hard? Of course. But anything worthwhile doesn't come easy. Now, am I saying you need to become super famous? No. But having money and game would increase your SMV by a lot. And these things are much more achievable for the average man. All right, number 23, personality is cope. And very simple, this is the claim that advice like just work on your personality and your confidence is something that attractive men will tell more unattractive men to make them feel better, and not something that actually changes the outcome. Now, what is real about this? In a 5-second swipe on an app, yeah, personality has zero chance to register. Now, this one I completely disagree with unless you're deformed or a sub 5, which in that case, I'm sorry. But like I said before, even ugly guys can pull if they have a bit of game. Will they be the hottest chicks? No, but it's at least better than nothing. And I think game is very underrated because you can punch way above your looks match with a lot of game. I've seen normies pull 8 out of 10s with game alone. And I'm sure you've seen couples in Walmart or something where it's like some fat slob with one of the hottest women you've ever seen. And a good chunk of that is because of personality and game. All right, number 24, self-improvement is futile. And this is a rejection of Red Pill's central promise that, things like gym selling and money maxing won't meaningfully move the needle for someone starting from an unattractive baseline, because that's the real problem. It's the bone structure and it can't be changed or anything. But I simply reject this entirely because, like I mentioned before with the Walmart chud or the ugly guy with game, there are a lot of exceptions to this. And even if you agree with this, like I said, surgery is always an option. I don't know why people leave this out of the conversation because this can be done once you money max. All right, number 25. Surgery is the only real intervention. This is pretty self-explanatory, but invasive procedures like jaw advancement surgery, leg lengthening, eyelid surgery can meaningfully change someone's attractiveness or outcomes. And yes, surgery can absolutely be a reasonable option, especially like I said, if you're ugly or deformed. Again, sorry, but that's just what it is. The only issue is, again, the emphasis on looks, because the clinical data has shown that people chasing surgery as a fix for their sense of worthlessness actually shows a lot of them don't actually feel better afterward, because the thing driving their misery was never really their jawline to begin with. But this is very case by case. Just don't expect your your double jaw surgery to cure your sense of ugliness, because most of the time it's more of a psychological thing and deeper rooted. All right, number 26, the halo effect. This is a very well established term from psychology. People who are seen as more attractive automatically get seen in a more positive view, and in completely unrelated categories like intelligence or trustworthiness, and even when there's no actual connection, funny enough. And this is the single best supported finding on this entire list. I don't disagree with this, so I'm just gonna move on. 27, hypergamy is biological. This is the black pill's take. It treats women's preferences for higher status partners as a fixed, unchangeable, biological constant, and it's not something shaped at all by culture or circumstance. Again, I actually kind of agree with this. It's hardwired into their DNA to want a man who can protect, provide, and have resources. So moving on. All right, number 28, dating app data. This refers to a lot of self-run experiments, usually fake profiles set up with a different attractiveness levels. And you've seen these vids before. The Chad gets all the hoes and the Chud doesn't, the 80-20 principle. Again, not much disagreement here. So the only thing I will add is, again, yeah, you can compensate with other areas in your life, but on dating apps, yeah, you're kind of cooked. All right, time in the market versus the missed window. This is the belief that if you didn't get a social or romantic experience during your teenage years or early 20s, you've missed the development window that's permanently closed. And that guys who started dating and socializing early built a foundation you can never catch up to, no matter what you do. And there is something to this. The teens and early 20s usually are when people get their first reps in at flirting and handling rejection and reading social situations. It's very low stakes, right? And starting early does tend to make it feel more natural sooner. And it is somewhat backed by the science. The critical window idea comes from real neuroscience, but that concept applies to things like learning language, where there's an actual kind of hard biological cutoff. But your social skills aren't that. The research is clear that the brain keeps building new social behavior patterns well into adulthood. And the late bloomer isn't a myth. It's one of the most common patterns therapists and social skill coaches actually see at every age range from 25 to 55 and even beyond that. And so regardless, you can still catch up no matter the age. All right, moving on. Number 30, racial hierarchy. This is the claim that there's a fixed racial hierarchy in dating desirability with certain racial groups, being seen as largely undesirable by the vast majority of women and getting less matches on dating apps. Now, this is a real truth nuke. Yes, race does play a part in your dating life. However, it's not the end all be all. Will it be harder for you to date depending on race? Yes, 100%. The studies have shown that. However, that doesn't mean you are doomed to eternal loneliness, okay? I'm gonna keep saying it, but self-improvement is always the answer because the numbers shift country by country. Think about it. Asian men statistically score lower on dating preferences, but Asians might be seen less desirable in some countries, right? But if they go to an Asian country, do you think they will be seen as less desirable? Probably not as much as it would be in, let's say, America, for example. And that's another thing too. There's always the passport bro movement where you can just go to a different country if you don't like your circumstances or you want better quality women. And that's another thing too, is guys will talk about, oh, it's hard to get money, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, okay, well, even if that is the case, that's a limiting belief that I disagree with fundamentally. But even if you do agree with that, you can just go to a poorer country and find the baddies there. Like, I don't understand this argument. All right, number 32, it's over or it never began. It's a very common fatalistic phrase used within the black pill community to declare that for men below a certain attractiveness threshold, romantic or social success isn't just unlikely, it's treated as impossible. Now, if this feeling has been living in your head, I'm not going to try and pretend it's nothing just to move the video along. There is an element of truth to it, however, but this fatalistic mindset is a disease. Who decides the outcome of your life? The answer is yourself. Like I said before, self-improvement is going to be the key to all this. If you're chopped, looksmaxxing surgery. If you're fat, gym cell mode. If you're broke, money max. If you're socially awkward, start learning game and talking to people. It feels over and it is over are two different scenarios. Your mind under enough pressure does something called catastrophizing, turning hard right now into impossible forever. And it's what a stressed brain does under enough weight, but it's treatable and it's not a character flaw. And so if this is where you are tonight or today, today, go talk to an actual good therapist, ideally, or at least a friend about it. Because that thought is lying to you about how permanent your situation is, and you don't have to sit with it alone. All right, and finally, number 33, lay down and rot. This is an extreme black pill term for giving up entirely, withdrawing from effort, social contact, and sometimes even basic self care. And it's the belief that nothing you will do will change the outcome anyway. Now, I can relate to this heavily. Wanting to disappear when everything feels stacked against you is one of the most common human responses to pain there is. That's not laziness. Don't ever let anyone tell you that it is. This is the actual research on withdrawal, specifically behavioral activation. It's one of the best supported depression treatments that exist. It shows that pulling away reliably makes things worse over time, not neutral. It makes it worse, which means the instinct, which is extremely relatable, is actually pointing you in the wrong direction because you're kicking yourself while you're down. And that level of despair, I remember being alone, crying in my room because I felt so alone and unloved and like everything felt so hopeless. And I know this is cliche to say, but it actually does get better. If you choose to lock in and change your life for the better, you will see a dramatic change in your life. I in high school was looked down upon, judged for being a chud, and also was just very isolated in my early life. But I was fortunate enough to find God, become an entrepreneur, looksmaxx, and my life completely changed for the better. So I'm living proof of this, that it does work. I am the embodiment of the red pill, and that's why I will always be preaching about self-improvement until the day I die. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want me to make more videos like this, I'm curious to know your thoughts. Let me know if you want to see more of this content and this kind of style and topic, or should I just stick to fitness? And let me know what you agree with and disagree with.